The webinar today is hosted by Omdena, and we almost have the weekend. So I would say it's the best time to think a bit about how to learn data science. And we have an expert in the field. So I'm very glad to have Eric Weber from California calling in. And Eric is a senior data scientist, former professor, used to be a senior data scientist also at LinkedIn. And Eric is producing great content via LinkedIn that I have been following, where I got a lot of inspiration from. And we at Omdena, we have been running many projects on different problems, and we always got the feedback of, okay, how can we improve the learning experience? How can I acquire skills more effectively? And David, who's part of the Omdena community, who's calling in from Poland, he said that a lot of people in his workplace are also asking him questions. And apparently there are a lot of questions around how can we improve the learning experience. And today we are going to talk about exactly this. So we will talk about learning strategies, we will talk about learning types, we will talk about Eric's perspective and experience on these topics and how he went into the field. And we will make it a very interactive session. So that means that we will go through different themes and we will ask questions. And if you have a question, then just join in. And you can either use the chat function, which is at the bottom in the center, or you can join in via audio if you want, and you can raise your hand. So you should have the function when you click on your profile, which shows raise hand. And then I see that you raise your hand, and then I can bring you into the conversation. So I would say, let's start. So I give the stage to Eric. Eric, why don't you introduce yourself real quick? How did you get into data science? Where are you based? What's going on in your life right now?
Cool, sounds great. Well, thanks everyone for joining. I won't say this morning because the time zones are clearly distributed across the world, but I am calling in from Southern California in the United States. So it's about 6:30 in the morning here, which is actually my preference. Coffee helps a lot, but I'm really happy to be able to be here to talk about this topic specifically. I think more than anything, this is the question that comes up because data science has taken off so dramatically. The support system to learn it, develop in it, not only get into it, but also to continue to develop in it as an expert has had a tough time keeping pace. Over time, I've learned there's not a lot of resources for certain areas. There's certain areas that index very high in availability. Like you can find a lot of courses on data cleaning and data visualization. But as far as things that are more key to the data science role specifically, how do you create an effective model for business partners, right? Like there's a lot of discussion about it, but a lot less formal instruction around that same topic. And so my experience, I started out in the academic world. I did research in big data and statistics, very much applied to education at that point in time, like how do people learn, specifically with a bent toward mathematics and computer science. I have been in the industry world for about 6 years now, in various companies, large, small, in between. And almost invariably, we run into the same issue. It's like, what's data science? And people argue over that. And then once they've defined that, they argue over, how do I learn it? It's like this conversation goes around and around and around. To me, it's about figuring out what resources are out there and matching you with the right resources. But before that, you have to define what component of data science you are interested in, right? Knowing what you want to learn is as important. Like saying, I want to learn data science is not entirely helpful because it's such a broad field. Defining what you want to know and why you want to know it is a really key component, but there's not a lot of guidance around that. So I'm hoping to use today as kind of a chance to think through that, think through how you approach doing that. I don't have a perfect solution. I don't think anybody does, but there are ways to think carefully about it so that you spend your time most effectively. So with that, we can kick it off.
Thanks, Eric. So I would like to ask you, how did you find your own way into data science? Can you maybe start with your own story? How did you get interested, and maybe share a few milestones along your path?
Sure. I think so I've thought about this question before. It's like, when did I start doing data science? And I probably started calling it data science in like 2014. But I probably was doing the practices that surround it starting in about 2008. I started learning how to program in R in 2008. And let me tell you, programming in R in 2008 was not pretty. There was nothing nice about it. There were very few packages that were supportive of anything. I remember writing some very ugly loops to do basic tasks that now require almost no time. But I think along the way, I kept getting closer and closer to thinking about data science when I started working on problems at scale. Initially in the academic world, I was working on problems where the data sets were not extraordinarily large. And I was doing more pure statistics at that point. And it was very much about doing research, publishing a paper. And I think around 2014, I started to really take notice of the development of big data technologies that allowed you to ask questions that weren't possible to ask before, where you could look at data sets that had billions of rows rather than thousands, and do things that just weren't possible before. And so my transition probably took place around that point, where I stopped thinking, okay, this data set is reasonable. And I was like, I can deal with the data set as big as I want. So it was much more about opening up and asking different questions. That was around the point when I really started investing and thinking through cloud computing, how it could accelerate the work that I was doing. And so 6 years or so, probably, where I would say I've been doing data science more at scale. But it's that transition point is kind of fuzzy. I don't think I woke up one day and was like, okay, I'm now a data scientist. Like, it's a way of thinking, it's a way of using tools. It's not necessarily like you just flip a switch one day. So I think that transition, like for many people, is probably a little bit, it may not be perfectly defined. It's not, being a data scientist is not like the day that you change your title. And it's much more about your thinking and your practice.
So this is something interesting because in one of our last webinars, we talked about mindset, and we talked about overcoming failure, which will also be addressed today to a certain degree. But what we discussed was basically, how can you find your own path? And in the end, because the field is so complex and there are so many different things that one can focus on, it is crucial to kind of pave your own path, to go on your own journey, and to basically find your own way. So when you were talking about your own journey of getting into data science, I think there was not that much guidance maybe as there is right now, or at least not that many resources and so many different courses and frameworks, and even so many that it can be sometimes overwhelming. I think there's so much right now out there. So did you get any advice? Did you have mentors? And I would also be curious, if so, what was the best advice that you got back then? And what was one of the worst advice that you got?
That's a good question. I will try to get to each of the questions, and if I forget to touch on one of them, just feel free to follow up. At the time, like getting into data science, paving your own path, I actually think it was probably easier to follow, almost easier to get into the field in 2013, 2014, because there weren't 200 courses that were trying to teach you what data science is. There weren't like thousands of programs you could join to become a data scientist. The title was still not extraordinarily well defined in most companies. And so people were kind of making it up as they go. For me, and my advice continues to be the same then as it is now. You have to figure out something that is sustainable for you. Like if you go into data science trying to conform and choosing your skill set based on what you think is going to be marketable at that moment in time, one, everything changes. So what's marketable today may not be marketable 2 years from now. But more important than that, if you are trying to force yourself to learn things that you don't enjoy or that you are not passionate about, you will burn out very quickly. Burnout in data science is probably something we don't talk about enough, but people try to go into the field by trying to optimize on title and salary, but then sometimes they realize they really don't like the work. And if you don't like the work, there's only going to be so long that you are going to be in this type of position. So for me, it's figuring out what makes you interested, right? Is it data visualization that you're really good at? Is it data cleaning that you're really good at? Do you really like modeling? Is it stats heavy that you care about? I think pretty often we get told that a data scientist has to be good at everything, but I actually rarely find that the best data scientists are good at everything. They have some specific skill that they're passionate about. There are certain, like if you think through people in your network, right? You tend to know who would you be your go-to person if you had a stats question? Who would be your go-to person if you had a data viz question? Who would be your go-to person if you were like, I don't know how to scale this to run on billions of rows? Like, figure out what you're good at and then let that sort of guide you on your path. The problem that we have with so many data science programs, analytics programs, courses, everything, it just is churning out people who all look the same, right? Like on paper, they all do the same projects. They've all worked on the same data sets. I just 2 weeks ago, I spent, probably reviewed 500 data science resumes, and certainly like 250 of those looked more or less the same because they had taken the same courses, they had worked on the same data sets, they had looked at data from the most popular Kaggle competitions ever. And that, I can tell you, is not going to be your way in. Your way in is to make sure you align what you're interested in with what might be available. And maybe the hardest part of that is figuring out what you're interested in. Like, because what you're interested in is like, I know for me, it's stats heavy stuff. Like that's what I'm interested in. I try to optimize any position I do on experimental design and statistics. I'm not as interested in, I like data visualization, but that's not the thing that does it for me. I like data cleaning, and often data cleaning is a key component of doing stats. But you kind of have to figure out what you're good at. And so at the time, I didn't really have a mentor when I went in. I think I was probably in a different place though, because I had done my PhD in mathematics with a focus in statistics. And so I knew what I liked, right? It was not hard for me to figure out what area I cared about the most. And I think if I were to advise you, whether it's a mentor or somebody else, if someone else can help you figure out what it is you're passionate about, great. But also don't rely on a mentor to the degree where they tell you what you should do. Like that has to be your decision. If it's not your decision, you're going to end up 5 years later wondering like, why did I make this career transition? In terms of advice I've gotten along the way, there's a lot of bad advice out there. There's like, if you spend enough time on social media, on Twitter, or LinkedIn, there's a lot of people selling advice on how to get into the field. Part of the reason that I post actively on LinkedIn is because I get really tired of all the noise that exists. There's a lot of noise coming from people who are A, trying to sell you something, or B, trying to sell themselves. And I really think that does a disservice to people trying to enter the field. And so my advice to you is be really careful about who you take advice from. Make sure that they have the background, the expertise, that they aren't trying to sell you a product, because I think that does a disservice. And while it might be good for them, I think it actually ends up being relatively dangerous for a lot of other people. As far as mentors go, good advice, I think best advice I've ever gotten is certainly probably just make sure that you're doing something that you wake up excited to do. You may not love every component of your job, but if you wake up being like, oh, I have to go to work, it's not the right role. And maybe you can put up with that for a year, but over time that produces burnout, and it produces a lot of people that are unhappy. So that's a long way of trying to summarize things, but there's a lot of key points that I wanted to bring up, and hopefully leads into other parts of our conversation.
So you're basically saying find something that you're passionate about, something that you enjoy, and something that you are good at, ideally. So, and obviously that is maybe different for each one of us, how to do this. But based on your perspective as somebody who is also hiring people and going to resumes, I think one way of figuring out what you want to do is to try different things, right? So maybe do some internships, do some projects, and maybe take a little bit of time to explore a little bit about yourself, about your strength, and then make a decision. And sometimes I think people are a little bit maybe rushed. So trying to figure out things very quickly and then jump into something that might not be the best option. So what would you recommend there? Taking time, and maybe on the CV, it might seem that there was not really a clear path in the beginning, but then suddenly, somebody found what they want to do. So what would you say about this?
I think that's in an ideal world, no one jumps into a role until they're ready, until they know it's going to be good for them. But we also live in a reality where people are looking for work. They're trying to generate income. And so often I think optimizing on income and getting into a position ends up overtaking other things. My advice in a perfect scenario is that you have a position that more or less is your day job, whatever it may be. I've worked with a lot of people in the field, and sometimes the happiest people are those who have a day job. It may not be the thing they want to do for the rest of their life, but it at least sustains their lifestyle, what they need, so that they can do some exploring about what they want to do next. If you sort of view your current position, like your current position may not be something that you love, but if it gives you the ability to explore what comes next, like it can be a really valuable transition opportunity. When I look at people's backgrounds, I actually care relatively little about what work they did in the past. I think it's not a good, if you are trying to hire somebody and you optimize on their career progression, most likely you're going to miss out on people who have incredible ability. But people are, I think this happens with recruiters, right? They're looking for clear career progression, increasing levels of seniority, things like that. I look more at projects matter to me. I think when I first started hiring, I was like, projects, what are they worth? But actually projects can make a big difference. Doing projects on data sets that aren't, that have not been analyzed a million times is also very valuable. Like if I see another analysis on the iris data set, like it's going to be, it's too much. Even if it's like, honestly, even if it's like a simulated data set from like Spotify publishes simulated data, like all these, something different that shows that you're doing original analysis. Because part of the concern that I have is there's so much stuff out there that sometimes it's hard to know what part of this project was this person's original contribution and what part of the project is something interesting that they came up with themselves. And that's hard to discern when if I have 5 minutes max to look at somebody's resume and projects, that like really has to stand out. Now, when you think about trying to create this opportunity to break in for yourself, I totally agree with you that a variety of experience is incredibly important. Working on different data sets, different types of problems. Also, the ability to showcase that you've worked on different types of problems can be a big deal. In most companies, your role is not going to be so highly specialized that you're only doing marketing analytics, or you're only doing product analytics or analysis, or that you're doing building models. In fact, you're probably going to need to do each of these at different points in time, right? Throughout the company, in your time at a company. So if you can showcase that you have the ability to do different types of projects and work with different types of data, it can actually be really valuable. One thing to think about is a lot of companies are focused on user engagement, and a lot of companies still generate user engagement through Facebook. And so it's interesting when people are like, why would I do like Facebook campaign analysis or Google ads analysis? There are a lot of companies that their primary value and reach to consumers comes through Facebook and Google. And so if you can show that you are familiar and have a good sense of how data and campaigns work with Facebook and Google, that's a really valuable thing to companies. It's not about the scale of the project, the number of projects that you do. I tend to think it's about the variety, and that you show that you have the ability to think through different problems. That typically, when it comes to projects or CVs or resumes, that tends to stand out to me, even more so than like having the best internship in the world. If you had the best internship in the world, great. But if you worked on a very narrow problem, it doesn't necessarily tell me that you're able to tackle a whole lot of other problems, if that makes sense.
That's very interesting. By the way, everyone who's listening right now, feel free to share questions or note questions. Anytime when you think there's something on your mind that you want to share, please put it in the chat function, or you can join via audio. We want to make sure that we go through all of these themes in a way that we really address the questions along the way. So I would say, as we want to talk about how to learn data science, right now we got some very insightful perspectives, experiences from you, Eric, on the career, on how to get into a position and what's relevant from a job perspective. But now I would like to hand it over to David, who will ask a few questions about the learning types and how to most effectively learn data science. So David, as I said before, he's part of the Omdena community. He's a collaborator. He's done great work and projects. And yeah, David, why don't you go?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Before I ask a few questions, I have to say that I couldn't agree more with many things that, Eric, you have said before. And just to quickly add about my experience. Yeah, I'm based in Warsaw, Poland, and I have 20 years experience in business analytics. And I started working with data, in 2001. I worked for the company that was the first company that was a private company on Warsaw Stock Exchange. So it was a very forward-going company. And it was one of the first companies that was introducing the business intelligence software in Poland. So this is how I started. And of course, I was working, in Microsoft Access. I was working with the database system that was for the ERP system that was IBM AS400, very old system. I don't know if this type of database software still exists in usage. But then, because Access at the time had, as far as I remember, 2 gigabytes or it was not Access, it was probably Microsoft, yeah. That this was a limit for the files. So then I jumped into programming. I was interspersing SQL code in that. Then I, of course, jumped into regular expressions because I was responsible for the quality of the data, etc., etc. And this is how my career was building up without any mentorship. And this is how I finally then found myself, applying doing some automation, applying some algorithms, looking by myself, yeah, and implementing that in the company. So that was very interesting, yeah. And not a lot of people have the same abilities today, yeah. This data science is quite well footed right now, yeah, in the business world, and people who start, yeah, they start already in the projects, and they don't have the possibility to have the track, yeah, of learning that we had. And as a person who has a lot of experience and 20 years in the business, I'm still learning, of course. And 20 years I've graduated from the studies, and learning for me is an effective learning is very important for me, especially that right now I have my job, yeah, I have a family, so I have a lot of reduced time, yeah. And one thing that I have discovered during these years, yeah, when I was learning and working, I was not putting a lot of importance to that during my graduation time, is about the how we do our learning and how we learn to learn, yeah. And I have discovered that not only when I choose the proper part of the day for me, whether I choose whether it's books or videos, yeah, for me very important is that I'm writing, yeah, what I am learning, yeah. And I've discovered that I have a quite extensive recall, yeah, when I do writing. It takes me a lot of time, but then I have later I spend less time on repetition, yeah, because I'm focusing on specific types of learning that are good for me. And thanks to this, I'm more efficient in time. And not a lot of people, they forget about this very important thing, yeah, that you have to find your own way and focus on that way, yeah, improve, iterate, yeah. And I wanted to ask you, what's your position on that? And if you agree with me, what is the reason that people are not learned how to learn, and why they do not discover it yet? They rush quickly, watching a lot of videos, yeah, reading everything as possible, and then not measuring themselves, yeah, how effective they are in this learning.
So I agree with you in the sense of learning is not the same thing as passively absorbing and paging through information, right? It's a part of the challenge that I think exists is there are a lot of courses. There are a lot of articles written. There are a lot of podcasts, all forms of things. But what's challenging is, how do you know that you've actually made use of the thing that you've just read or worked on or done, right? It's really hard to know, okay, I just read this article, like, did this actually change anything for me? Do I understand something new? Part of what I think is important is figuring out what allows you to retain the things that you just read. If you find yourself reading or doing courses and you're not finding immediate ways to use the things that you've read, that you've interacted with, then you're probably not learning them in the way that makes sense for you. Right? I typically think that if you're finding value in a course or you found value in an article, you can almost immediately imagine how that would be useful for you in your day-to-day work. So to me, it's not necessarily that people are struggling to learn or that there's not enough content out there. They're just not finding the right content that they find translatable into the work that they're doing day to day. Like if I read an article or if I am using a new piece of code, typically it's most powerful when I can translate it into my work immediately. This is the tough thing with data science is people view it as they have to go learn this entire like warehouse of information and have it all available at any point in time, when that's not how our brains work. It's not how our jobs work. It's not how humans function. Like we, at different points in time, our jobs require us to be optimized on different parts of that warehouse of information. And it's not feasible to expect someone to know everything. Aside from, I think I've interviewed at some companies where I think they thought that was reasonable, but like that's not, it's not the case. And if a company signals that you should learn it, that you should know everything and be an expert in it, that's probably a good indicator that they're not a good fit for you. So for me, learning is about getting to find the right information at the right time. Like I learn something most effectively when I can translate it into my work at that moment. If I find a new package in R or Python, typically that package is most useful to me when I can apply it immediately. If I learn a new statistical technique or I'm reading a new paper, that is often most useful and most impactful long-term if I'm using it in that immediate future. So there's and so I think what's intimidating for people is they're like, well, there's so much to learn, but typically like you have to start somewhere, and typically starting in a place where you're working on a project or you're trying to do something, and then finding things that are going to help you actually try to accomplish that task. That's where you probably start to learn the most. Because otherwise you might invest hundreds and hundreds of hours learning something, but if you don't apply it right away or regularly, it's hard to retain it. I think there's a lot of things I learned, like, so think about coding, for example. It's pretty normal that like if I'm deeply invested in a particular analysis, I will master that specific set of commands, that approach, and I'll be able to remember everything on the fly. But if you ask me 3 weeks later, I'll probably not be able to immediately tell you those same commands. It's about having the ability to use different tools and skills, but you kind of have to be able to, like, I think this, like, there's this analogy that you have this like toolbox of skills that you can pick up at any point in time. That's not a good analogy, because it's not like you can just open up the box and pull out anything at any time that you want. Like you have to just know that you have the ability to get back into it if you need it. Most flexible people, like, you know, there's always jokes out there about like, well, I like the best educator for me was like Stack Overflow. And I'm like, well, I still find myself on Stack Overflow pretty regularly. And people like, you have to have the skill of Googling. And I agree. Like it's finding the right information at the right time. And as far as translating for learning, whatever learning type, whatever, I think it's much more about, do you find use in it right now? And can you translate it into something that you're doing right now?
Okay, perfect. Just a quick question that pops up to me. Do you think that there's too much content in terms of education on internet right now, and people, they have a problem in a way that they're trying to learn as much as possible, and they have a problem that they don't care about the planning. They want to just devour as much as possible without any structured approach to it.
I think there's a content problem for almost everything. We just have too much content in the world. Like there are days where I post on LinkedIn and I'm like, okay, I'm contributing to the content overload in the world. I think there's too much, but we're always going to have that problem. right? Because companies and people are trying to make money, they're trying to be leaders. People are genuinely trying to help out, but it produces this like gigantic flow of information. Where the problem there is nobody has digested all of the information in a way that allows them to know what's good and what's not, and what they need and what they don't need. And so people view it as this like, well, I'm just going to increase the number of hours that I watch content or that I spend taking courses, and that's going to translate into what I need. It doesn't work like that. When it comes, so if you think about let's say that we agreed that once you've done 1,000 hours of data related work, you're qualified to start being an analyst or being, I don't know, whatever the title is. Everyone's going to argue differently about what that 1,000 hours looks like. 1,000 hours of watching courses is not going to be the thing that gets you to that point. It's going to be watching courses and then spending the 1,000 hours actually doing the work. So I think there's this disconnect that if you take a course for an hour, that hour, the value of that hour is going to be translated. It's going to be translated to impact by you doing something with it. Watching that course alone isn't going to be the valuable thing. And this is true of analytics programs across the world, certifications across the world. It's not so much about the completion of it. It's like, what are you doing with it? What did you produce from it? I've watched a lot of really great lectures, but the number of them that I've translated into actual impact from my own work is probably relatively small. And I love lectures. Like, I mean, I used to be at a university. So I think there's great value in it, but I think sometimes there's a disconnect between watching content, doing courses, and then actually changing it to impact.
Yeah, and just referring to what you have said, that it's not, you're not able, or it's not possible to apply everything what you have learned in practice. You have to wait on there. Sometimes it's not working. Sometimes you don't have an opportunity. But generally, you have to learn. And when you learn, planning is very important. And this question pertains mainly. This is a question from me specifically, that for me planning is very important. And I find myself sometimes that I plan with too much optimism, and then the subject gets a lot harder than I thought. And I don't have the time. I have to reschedule. I have to spread my timelines, and probably this is okay. What I found problematic later, that when I jumped into some quite easy area, because I was changing the times in the hard subject, I find myself also doing that in the smaller subject or much easier subjects, and it's difficult for me to keep the motivation, to structurally be planning, quite extensively.
I think it's yeah, if I laid out a 90-day roadmap of what I was going to learn and when, the chances that I align with that 90-day roadmap are very low. I look at it, I try to work on a much smaller scale, and I try to plan on a weekly basis. And I try to always underestimate how much time I'll have. So usually that's on like a Sunday where I'm planning out the week. I have to carve out time, literally put it in my calendar in my workday or after my workday, where that time is blocked off. I think the challenging part is people overestimate how much time they'll have. And they also, if you don't have someone holding you to it, it's easy to just keep pushing it down the road. Like, I'll get to it later. If you're going to take this approach, treat it very much like you would a university course. You have to show up and you have to put the time in. I actually continue to think this is why university courses will probably never die, because people want regular check-ins. They want deadlines that are enforceable. Self-learning sounds great until you're having to like lay it out all yourself. It's actually not so easy. So for me, I try to think about it in smaller chunks. What am I hoping to get done this week? And I actually like try to underestimate how much I can get done. So that's great if I get it done earlier than I thought, but I also try to be reasonable. If you say like, I'm going to take these 5 courses in the next 5 weeks, and then it gets to the end of week 1 and you're only partway through the first course, what you're doing to yourself is you're setting yourself up to not do any of the courses rather than just say, okay, I got through this much and that's positive. You also need to give yourself positive reinforcement for doing the things that you're doing. If you just are like, well, I've only taken this 1 course and I have 100 more to go. That's typically not how it works. That's typically not like, this is like people who start out on LinkedIn or on other social media where they're trying to share their thoughts and their impact. Everything looks small, but it starts to actually like accumulate in a non-linear way. You start to think about other things. You start to connect ideas. If you do 3 courses, it's not like those courses don't overlap with each other. You start to make connections between these subjects. And so you got to start somewhere. Start small and actually underestimate how much you think you'll be able to do. Once I do that, then it feels better when you're like, wow, I actually finished it. Rather than getting to the end of the week and being like, nope, didn't do that. I have no chance of finishing that type of stuff. But I think we're really like in this field, people are really ambitious, and they also know that they're typically good academically. And so they overestimate how much they can get done. I'm guilty of it. I look at my calendar some days and I'm like, there's no chance. Like, what did I do to myself this week? But I think underestimate it. And it sounds weird, but I think it can be a really powerful way to learn.
I want to quickly chip in and share some thoughts on the topics and the points that we have addressed, because if we summarize it, what you have been saying, Eric, is that basically it's about usability. So that's the usefulness. So when you learn something, think about, is it useful and where can I apply it? And often, if there's so much content out there, we might be able to get something here, and there's a super course, and there's something marketed, and this will bring you into the data science career in 2 weeks, and this will only take 1 week. And then we are pulled into different directions. But I think it boils down to, okay, what I'm learning here, can I apply it in my life? Can I really apply it in my life? And that's, in the end, the only thing that is important, because we are living and we want to do something that creates something. So I think you're saying usefulness is one aspect of it. And then you are saying, don't approach it from a perspective of, okay, I want to go through 100 hours of courses.
Right.
And when in the projects that we have been running, usually people have done, when they are beginners, they have done maybe 1 or 2 courses, and then they jump into a project and then they do something with it. And the feedback that we get is that then people figure out, what is it that I learned that I actually can apply, and where are gaps, and what is it that I really need to learn? And from my personal perspective, when I went to university and I studied, I also accumulated a lot of information. I learned a lot of things. I put a lot of things into my mind, but I did not think about how to apply it. But when I made the change from, okay, what is it that I'm engaging here in right now, and how can I apply it, then everything changed. And that's pretty straightforward advice. But I think because of the overwhelming information that is out there, it's so easy to be pulled away from this very straightforward advice. So I just wanted to repeat that. I think that has to sink in.
It's hard because what's happened is data science being so attractive to candidates and to employers has created a lot of opportunities for companies to market and monetize the learning experience, right? You look at the number of different ways that people like, you can be a data scientist in 6 weeks or 12 weeks or whatever it may be, boot camps, everything like that. People are inundated with what to learn. I sometimes look at programs and I'm like, I have no idea what I should be doing. I have often found there are certain companies that do a good job, like companies that are clear about monetizing and they're like, hey, this is what we do, this is what it costs. That's a good thing, actually, if they're being direct and open about what they're delivering for you in return. What I'm concerned more about are the companies like, hey, I can teach you to be a data scientist, and there's always a catch, right? There's always a catch. So that's one reason I like Data Camp. For me, is one of my favorite resources because you pay for it, but the value you get is very clear in return. They have they have so many different courses that you can find a course on the thing that addresses what you're working on in a given moment. And so when you think about learning resources, try to find something that gives you variety, so that as you work through different projects and issues and concepts, that you can go back to one centralized place. Part of the issue, I think, is we have the content is distributed across so many platforms and systems and companies that it's hard to access when you need it. And so the more centralized you can be about where you learn and how you get there, I actually think it's more efficient in general. And I've tried to narrow it down to like, what do I care about? It's easier for me to access. And then, and that's been very useful for me because I don't have time to search across videos, across different platforms and be like, okay, I hope I find the right thing. It takes so much time, and also the quality varies a lot.
All right. So I would like to talk also about the concept of motivation that David started to address. Mm-hmm. So learning is something data science, especially learning data science, can be challenging. And there are things that we might not enjoy that much to do. But how do you stay motivated? Do you have certain tactics, certain mindsets? How do you keep going, even though it might be challenging at times?
That is that is a great question, because I think the first thing to recognize is that your motivation is going to ebb and flow. It's not always going to be constant. You're going to wake up some days and you're not going to have that motivation. You're going to wake up other days and be ready to go. I think the important point is that more often than not, you feel motivated. I don't think anyone in the world wakes up 7 days a week and they're like, maybe some people do. They jump out of bed and they're like, I'm motivated. You have to have something that you're trying to work toward. For me, that I've kicked around a lot into a lot of different roles, and I've consulted with a lot of companies. And I found that what motivates me is being able to help other people think through this field, what data science means, what it is, what it isn't. I'm trying to help people enter the field, develop in the field, trying to help companies think through how they should structure their data organizations. And the reason for that is, like, I'm interested in it. I'm interested in this problem, and I think it's a massive problem. We've scaled up data teams worldwide and without thinking through exactly why we've done it. And that's like a personal passion for me. And I don't think I found it until, like, I've been in individual roles in data science, and like, I love data science. But what motivates me is the impact it has on an organization. And so if I feel like I'm contributing toward helping people and organizations think about data science more effectively, that is what I hold on to. And so that's comes back to what I mentioned at the start, is you kind of have to figure out what you enjoy. Like, if you're motivated by something, it should feel fun to do it. It shouldn't feel like a job. And so that doesn't mean that all of data science has to feel fun to you, but there should be something that, like, when you're doing it, you're like, the time kind of flies by. It's easy to invest in it. You can, like, there are nights where I'm reading things or conversing with people where I'm like, oh, it's very late, because like it's been super easy to think through. Motivation is generally tied to like personal interest in something. You can optimize on how do you say it? So there's a lot of discussion about like intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, right? Like, there's a lot of organizational psychology on what motivates people. And the things that are not sustainable are extrinsic motivation. That would be things like salary, benefits, having food at work, having fame or recognition. Like, those things are not sustainable, and they actually don't make people happy long term. Intrinsic motivation is much more about finding, what do you care about for yourself? What interests you? What do you care about? And so I think the thing I worry about is a lot of the motivation that people have is like, get a job, make money. Like, those things should be a consequence of you doing what you enjoy. They shouldn't be the thing you're trying to optimize on. And that's what's hard. I've advised people after talking to them, and I'm like, I don't know if you really want to do this type of work. Like, because the first thing they ask, them, like, what kind of salary can I get? I'm like, that's not the right question to ask, because salary is not something that over time is going to keep you motivated. As weird as that sounds, like, but you talk to people who make, like, I was in Silicon Valley, you talk to people who make a lot of money and are at very high roles, and they're miserable. Like, you adjust over time. Money is not going to be the thing. It may be like we all need a certain baseline to live, to do what we want to do. But if your primary reason is recognition and compensation, those things burn away pretty quickly. And so I try to find, what do I care about internally? What keeps me up, interested at night? And it's taken a while. It's been actually pretty hard, but I think that gives some insight into how I approach motivation.
We are almost running out of time. We have 5 more minutes. Time flies by. I want to address a few questions, and cool. I want to talk about one last thing, which is failure. Eric, I think data science is challenging. There are a lot of people getting into it. There's a lot of competition happening. Do you have any approach to deal with failure, or how do you think about failure?
I tend to view failure as actually, one, it's like a necessary component of getting to where you want to go. If you ask someone and they say they haven't ever failed at something, then they're probably lying to you. Or they're like 1 in a billion. Most people fail. It's the view on like what you do from failure that matters the most. Like, if you fail at something, it's only really bad if that stops you completely, right? Like, if suddenly you fail and you stop and you give up, then yes, it's a negative thing. But I've failed a bunch of times. As much as I've been on site interviews with a lot of companies that you would recognize if I said them, and like, I've failed a bunch of them. And it sucks in the moment, but you kind of have to pivot and say like, all right, that's that. What did I learn from it? What am I going to do next? Failure should kind of be like how do I put it? It's like you're going to have failure on your roadmap, but like, if you just stop and you quit when you fail, that's the thing that's going to be negative for you. Most successful people fail, and they fail in pretty massive and embarrassing ways, actually. Anyone who's done great, who looks great now, you look in their past, they've failed a bunch of times. So that's how I think about it. It's not a necessary component of getting to where you want to go.
And failure also, it has a negative connotation to it, but in the end, it's learning, right? I mean, everything in life is it's just learning. Perspective is the most powerful tool that we have. So
failure, what is the failure is feedback? That's pretty much a good, failure is a piece of feedback. It shouldn't be like something that stops you from going anywhere.
Yes, so we have a question by Mateos, and I think there are many beginners in the field. So the question is around that, Eric, that you said that most people have a similar background, datasets, courses, and so on. But we need to start somehow from somewhere. So the question is, how can a beginner be unique and differentiate themselves, and how to stand out in the selection process?
So this is a really fair, it's a really fair question. And I think it's asked in this way for a lot of reasons, but people often optimize what they're learning and why they're learning it so they can stand out in the selection process, right? If you start trying to be like, I'm going to optimize what I choose to do now so that I have hope of getting noticed more later, what that's done is it's created a lot of, I think that mindset has actually created a lot of people doing things in similar ways, because they're like, I just need to have projects. What about these projects? It'll just, sure, I'll put it on my resume. This goes back to really spending time assessing what is it that you care about. For me, to stand out in something, it's being able to have something, how do people put it, like a superpower? Like, what are you really, really good at? A lot of resumes that I see from beginners, they try to list every skill and every course and every certification. But I'd much rather know, like, what do you consider yourself to be an expert in? What are you really good at? What do you really care about? Is it data visualization? Is it statistics? And highlight that. Some of the most effective resumes and presentations of yourself are saying, hey, these are my top 3 skills. I would much rather see something that tells me what your top 3 skills are rather than see a listing of 20 skills. That matters a huge amount to me. Standing out in a selection process is about making sure people can understand what you're good at. And it may not work. In some cases, it may not be a good match, but you should be very open about what is it that makes you stand out. And as far as what courses you choose to do, what you choose to learn, that should align with what you want to stand out about yourself. And I think that more than anything helps in the selection process. It may still be frustrating, right? You're going to have to apply to a lot of jobs. That's just how it is. But if you have that one thing that stands out, that's the thing that will sort of set you apart from everybody else.
Thanks, Eric. I think we have time for one more question, which comes by Oyekani. I hope I pronounced your name correctly, or Emmanuel, second name, which is, most data science courses and training aren't typical of an end-to-end data science project. For example, they don't include the step of data collection. What recommendations would you give to source for the right data, for example, to cover the entire process or cycle? I think that's what the question is about.
You're not going to find that in a data science course. Like, you're going to find that in data engineering courses, almost invariably. I would actually recommend that most people who are taking data science courses also take some data engineering courses. I'd say in the next 2 or 3 years, there will be more data engineers hired than data scientists. I'm pretty sure about that. Because so many companies have scaled their data science teams, but they haven't scaled their data engineering teams to keep pace. And also, if you're going to be a data scientist, the idea, if you're able to understand and do some data engineering, that makes you really marketable. It's a skill set that most people don't have. I don't necessarily have it. I understand the concepts behind data engineering, but I would say like that's where we're headed toward, is people who actually build the foundation for data scientists and analysts and ML engineers to do their work. It's huge. And something like, I expect in 3 years we'll be having the same conversation about, there are a lot of data engineering courses out there. How do we think through them? How do we do with them? I think that's just the nature of this field and how it works. But that's where I would start. You won't find that in a data science course, but you will find it in data engineering.
I think we are running out of time, so I want to wrap up. I think the key message here, and I really resonate with that, and that connects to the experience that we have in our project at Omdena and to people that I spoke to and to my personal experiences, is to listen to yourself. I think not listen even that much to external sources, not even listen to this webinar that much, but try to take time and figure out your own path. And I think nobody can really give an answer on that is what you should do. That is exactly what you should work on. I think we have to understand ourselves a little bit better and take time to figure out what we are good at, what we are passionate about. And then we can build our own path, and we can go step by step, and then the path becomes more clearly step by step. And I really resonate with that. And if I can add to the data engineering element in Omdena, because this webinar is it's hosted by Omdena, what we've seen is that we are running projects where we usually have up to 50 people joining, and people come from diverse backgrounds. So we have data engineers, we have ML engineers, data scientists, we have students and beginners. We also have domain experts, and we call it collaborative artificial intelligence. So it means to bring people together from diverse backgrounds that work together to solve a problem. And that's really what we were talking about, really sums up what we have been learning in all of those projects that we have been doing. So if you're interested in learning more about Omdena, you can check us out. You can check us out via www.omdena.com. And if you're interested, you can join a project. We usually have between 2 to 3 challenges or projects starting per month. And that's it from my end. And I want to say thank you to Eric. Thank you for sharing those insights. It's been very helpful. And I will wrap all of this up. So I will also write a wrap-up article about this, and I will share it with you. And yes, in the end, I think the best thing that we can do is we can understand ourselves a little bit better and not be that much dependent on external sources. And so Eric, thank you very much.
Thank you guys, I appreciate it. Have a great rest of the day and weekend.
Yes, the same to you and the same to everyone joining, and enjoy your time. And maybe we see each other in one of the future Omdena webinars. We do that usually on a weekly basis. And maybe you want to take the time on the weekend to figure out what you want to focus on learning and how to apply it. So thank you very much for joining in.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Bye-bye.